Old Cahaba in Alabama is said to be haunted by a strange orb light that glides through the trees, tracing a path no one has walked in 100 years. For those who've seen it, the sight is unforgettable. But as it turns out, the ghost stories are the least disturbing thing about this place. So in this episode, we're going to explore the human tragedy of Alabama's lost capital, peeling back the layers one by one. From the ancient earthworks to a vanished capital and strange lights still seen among the ruins. And by the end, we'll find out what might really walk at Old Cahaba. And if you love these kinds of historical rabbit holes as much as I do, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Old Cahaba sits where two rivers meet, at the edge of the Alabama wilderness. It's quiet now, just grass, foundations and trees, but this ground has been lived on, fought over and abandoned more times than any other town in the state. The site lies about 10 miles southwest of Selma, where the Alabama River curves east to join the smaller Cahaba River. In spring, the floodplains turn into a mirror, with water spreading across fields where streets once ran. In summer, the air hangs thick with the smell of mud and cypress. Archaeologists call it a palimpsest, which is a hard word to say, but means a civilization written over the top of another, with each layer leaving its marks. Beneath the ruins of the 19th century capital lie traces of earlier lives, indigenous mounds with settlements that stood here long before the first brick was laid. And under those, the bones of an older river still moving in the dark. The deeper you look here, the stranger it gets. So long before the name Cahaba appeared on a map, this bend in the river was already home to people. Archaeologists have found traces of what may have been a fortified Mississippian settlement here, built around 500 years ago, with its mounds still faintly visible beneath the modern soil. Here they raised timber palisades, worked the floodplain and buried their dead in sacred ground. Then they vanished, leaving only fragments of pottery, tools and fire-blackened clay. Centuries later, settlers arrived and built their own town directly on top of it. Two civilizations layered in the same earth, and it's here that the pattern begins. Every generation builds, abandons and forgets, until the past starts bleeding through again. People say Cahaba is haunted. That feeling, that sense of presence, might just be history breaking through on top of the surface. And when the settlers arrived in the early 1800s, they didn't see ghosts, they saw opportunity. In 1820, Alabama's first governor, William Wyatt Bibb, stood at this confluence of rivers and saw a future. He wanted a capital that would stand for progress, a city of broad streets, white pillars, and the promise of trade flowing in from every direction. There's just one problem. He built it on a floodplain. Surveyors carved a town out of the wilderness almost overnight. They laid out a perfect grid, wide boulevards, a central square, and street names borrowed from poets and presidents. The first state house rose on higher ground, brick by brick, while steamboats began arriving with goods from Mobile. For a moment, it must have felt unstoppable, a city rising from swamp and ambition. Legislators rode in on horseback, elegant homes appeared, and even a small theatre opened its doors. Cahaba was meant to be the proud face of a young state finding its voice. But the river had other plans. Seasonal floods turned streets into canals. Malaria swept through the town and livestock drowned where they stood. Government offices filled with mud, and the state archives, containing Alabama's earliest records, were nearly lost to rising water. By 1826, the dream was over. The capital moved to Tuscaloosa, and Cahaba was left behind, a grand plan washed back into the river that inspired it. You can still see the old street grid today if you walk the park after heavy rain. The outlines rise faintly beneath the grass, like a city trying to remember itself. If you want to understand the ghosts of Cahaba, start with people who refuse to leave, the ones who believed that if they waited long enough, the water might change its mind. So they stayed, and for a time, Cahaba came back to life. In the 1840s, Cahaba was reborn. The cotton trade brought new life, and the old capital became a bustling river port. Steamboats lined the docks, warehouses filled with bales of cotton, and the town glowed at night with the promise of money. At the centre of it all stood the Crocheron mansion, home to Mary Crocheron, daughter of one of Cahaba's wealthiest merchants. Her house was said to be the grandest in the Black Belt, with marble floors and a ballroom large enough to host half the county. Only the columns of it remain now, 4 pale sentinels standing in the grass. Visitors say the air around them feels colder there, as if the house is still there, invisible. The ghost stories here are so easy to believe because the ruins already look halfway there. For a while, Cahaba glittered again, a fragile second life built on cotton and hope. But prosperity never lasts long here. When the Civil War reached Alabama, Cahaba's riverfront changed again. The Confederacy converted a cotton warehouse into a prison, Castle Morgan, built to hold captured Union soldiers. Conditions in the prison were horrific. The ground flooded constantly, and prisoners had to sleep on damp boards or stand through the night to stay dry. Hundreds, not surprisingly, died from disease and exposure. When the war finally ended, the survivors were released. They were pale, skeletal men by this point, some barely able to walk. They were going to be sent north to Vicksburg, Mississippi, where the government had arranged transport home. They were told their ordeal was over. At the docks, a steamboat called the Sultana waited. It was built to carry 376 people. That spring, more than 2,000 men were crammed aboard. The captain had patched a leaking boiler instead of repairing it properly, hoping to save time and money. Army officials, anxious to clear the camps, waved them on. On April 27, 1865, as the Sultana steamed north past Memphis, the patched boiler exploded. The blast tore the boat apart and set it ablaze in the middle of the Mississippi River. Hundreds were killed instantly. Many more were burned or drowned just trying to reach the shore through cold, fast water, thick with debris and oil. The prisoners had already survived the prison camp, the malaria, the floodwaters. They never made it home. Out of more than 2,200 passengers and crew, over 1,100 died, making it the deadliest maritime disaster in US history. When people talk about Cahaba's ghosts, it's not hard to think of them, the men who endured everything, only to be claimed by the river in the end. For some of those men, Cahaba was the last place they knew peace. Locals say that on still evenings, voices sometimes drift across the prison field, soft, tuneless singing that fades as quickly as it comes. When the fighting stopped, the survivors left the town, but it never really recovered. After the war, Cahaba was nearly silent. The once bustling capital had become a ghost town in truth, its streets swallowed by weeds, its wharves broken, its homes left to rot. Only a few hardy families remained. Among them was Mary Elizabeth Pegues, a planter's widow whose husband, Colonel Charles Pegues, had died serving in the Confederate Army. She refused to leave their estate by the river, saying it was still his house and she would keep it for him until he came home. Neighbours described her as kind but haunted. She was often seen tending the garden alone, long after dark, carrying a small lantern to light her way through the hedges. Her husband had built that garden as a maze, a living puzzle of cedar and boxwood, designed for afternoon walks in quieter times. So when Mary died here in the 1870s, the story may have ended. But within months, travellers on the nearby road began to report a strange light moving through the grounds. It wasn't erratic like a torch or flickering like fire. It moved with purpose, pausing at corners, gliding down paths, as if retracing a memory. Some say it was the Colonel come back to find her. Others whispered that Mary herself could not rest, still walking the maze she loved. By the early 1900s, the legend had a name, the Light That Walks. Guides and locals alike repeated it as part of Cahaba's folklore. Even into the 21st century, park rangers still receive occasional reports. Visitors claiming to see a steady glow near the old Peggy site, sometimes caught faintly on camera, other times vanishing before their eyes. Now, scientists will point to methane rising from wet ground or headlights bending through fog. But those who've seen it say the movement is too deliberate and just too human. The truth is, no one really knows what the light is, but it's been part of Cahaba's story for more than 100 years, a flicker of persistence in the place that refuses to stay buried. But even that wasn't the end of Cahaba's story. By the late 1800s, a new community had taken root here, freed families, teachers, and missionaries working to rebuild on the ruins. Cahaba became known for its schools and its resilience. One small schoolhouse stood near the old river road. The teacher rang a bell every morning to call her pupils through the fog. Then one spring, the river rose again. The flood swept through the town, lifting the school from its foundations and carried it away. When the waters receded, there was nothing left, not even the bell. Park rangers now say visitors sometimes mention hearing a faint ringing from the woods on humid days. Most explain it as wind through the iron gates there, but others stand listening, certain they've heard it more than once. Cahaba's ghosts aren't always human. Sometimes they're echoes of routine, life refusing to notice it's gone home early. By the next century, Cahaba had slipped beneath the soil again, until archaeologists came looking. For most of the 20th century, Cahaba lay buried underneath farmland and forest. Then in the 1980s, state archaeologists returned, led by Dr. Vernon Knight of the University of Alabama and the Alabama Historical Commission. Teams began mapping the old streets, excavating wells and documenting foundations there. They discovered that almost everything still existed, not gone, just hidden. Even now, new finds appear after every flood. Ceramics, tools, and the outlines of buildings lost for more than a century. Cahaba is one of the few places in America where archaeology and haunting overlap completely. The same fog that locals call supernatural also helps reveal the past, as moisture lifts artifacts and soil shifts. Today, the site is a state park and an active research area. You can still see archaeologists walking the same ground with GPS and radar, lights moving through the mist, just as they did in the stories. It's hard to tell sometimes which kind of ghosts they're chasing. Either way, someone still has to fill out the report. Even now, the story isn't finished, and Cahaba's light still draws people back. Old Cahaba isn't a ruin frozen in time. It's a place that still moves, with water, with weather, with people. Every flood brings something new to the surface, and every excavation rewrites another line of its history. And yet, the legend hasn't changed. Visitors still talk about the light that drifts through the trees, following the path of the Peggy's garden maze. Park staff say it's reflections off the river, or gas rising from the ground. Others who have seen it aren't so sure. What's certain is that Cahaba refuses to stay buried. So let me know in the comments whether you've been to Cahaba or have a similar ghost story like this. I'd love to read it. And if you'd like more episodes just like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe, and consider joining as a member. It would help me out a lot. I'll see you next time.